Hello, my name is Rachel Hudson, I'm 30 years old, and I'm a single mother to my 6-year-old son, Ethan. I could never have imagined that my own father would publicly humiliate me, calling me the disgrace of the family right at the Christmas dinner table. And a few minutes later, he threw Ethan and me out into the damp winter evening. None of them had any idea that all these years they had been living off my fortune, $30 million. I just said, fine, and walked out of the house with my head held high. Living in the Hudson family meant one thing: the facade was more important than the truth. Our colonial-style mansion in a quiet but expensive suburb of Ohio always shone like a showpiece. Everything was ready for a sudden visit from my father's business partners or my mother's acquaintances from her book club. My father, William Hudson, held a high position in a law firm and measured a person's worth solely by status and connections. My mother, Linda, played the role of the perfect hostess, always in expensive outfits, with perfect hair and a relentless concern for keeping the family's reputation impeccable. From early childhood, I learned a simple truth: love here was given out in portions and always with reservations. "Sit up straight, Rachel," my mother would hiss quietly at receptions. "You're slouching again, it ruins the impression." My father preferred direct hits: "Why don't you have better grades, like your sister Megan?" Or, "Look at Karen at your age, she never had such problems." Megan, 2 years older, was their pearl, captain of the school cheerleading team, accepted into a prestigious university, and collecting one award after another. Karen, even older, by 4 years, had already managed to marry her college classmate David and give her parents grandchildren, as if on schedule, as if by order. And I always stood out from their picture. My sisters shone at parties, while I sat for hours at my laptop, fascinated by code and dreaming of my own projects. My parents saw me at social receptions, but my place was in the world of technology, where ideas were valued, not connections. In college, I met Ryan, a charming, energetic guy who knew how to speak beautifully and always seemed confident. He quickly won my attention, and for the first time, it seemed to me that I had a person next to me who understood me. We dated for a short time, and after 8 months I found out I was pregnant. The world seemed to stop. I sat in my tiny dorm room, holding the test in my hands, trying to gather my thoughts. The first thing I did was call my parents. The phone call was agonizingly long. First, my mother answered the phone. Her voice was cold, tense, like a string. I squeezed out, "Mom, I have something important to tell you. I'm pregnant." Silence hung on the line. I could only hear my own breathing and the distant noise of the television at their house. Probably half a minute passed, but it felt like an eternity. Then my father's voice came, sharp and abrupt. "I see. So you've decided to completely disgrace our family." I tried to explain that I wasn't going to give up the child, that I would take full responsibility. But in response, I only heard an annoyed, "Come home. We'll decide what to do about this." The word "decide" sounded like a verdict. For them, a decision meant anything but me making this choice myself. At that moment, I realized, defending my right to be a mother would be much harder than I could have imagined. Despite everything, I managed to finish my studies, switching to online lectures and doing assignments at night while my son Ethan slept peacefully beside me. Those first years were excruciatingly difficult. I lived in a small one-room apartment, took on freelance work, mostly programming, and was constantly searching for someone I could trust with my child for at least a couple of hours. Rarely did my parents agree to help with babysitting, but each time it was accompanied by their jabs and lectures on how I had ruined my life with wrong decisions. However, they had no idea that during these sleepless nights I was working not only on small orders for survival. I was developing the idea of my own startup, which I had been nurturing since my sophomore year. And when Ethan turned 1, I was able to get my first investment. And by his 3rd birthday, something happened that I could hardly believe myself. My company was bought out, and after all the taxes, I had $30 million in my account. And I kept all of this a secret from my family. I bought myself an inconspicuous 3-bedroom house and told my parents that I had gotten a regular job in customer support. So at all family gatherings, I continued to listen to their condescending comments and cold remarks. I wanted them to accept me and Ethan for who we are, not because I had millions in my account. Gradually, without advertising it, I became an invisible safety net for my family. When my father's investments began to collapse during the economic crisis, I secretly paid off their mortgage through a front company so they wouldn't lose their house. When my sister Megan's projects lacked funds for launch, unknown investors appeared at the most opportune moment. And when Karen's older children were on the waiting list for an expensive private school, special grants and special scholarships miraculously appeared for them. Despite the coldness and hidden cruelty of the family, my son Ethan, who was 6 at the time, grew up to be a smart and kind boy. He loved visiting his grandparents' house, as if not noticing their poisonous compliments and how my mother constantly compared him to Karen's exemplary children. That Christmas, I turned 30. I tried to convince myself that over the years my parents might have softened, that their judgment had weakened. Ethan had been looking forward to the trip for weeks with excitement. He dreamed of meeting his cousins and trying his grandmother's famous Christmas cookies. His childish joy was so genuine that I allowed myself to believe, maybe this time things would be different. Maybe my father and mother would finally see us for who we really are and accept us without comparisons and reproaches. But I was wrong. More wrong than ever. Christmas morning greeted us with frosty air and bright winter light breaking through the curtains. Ethan jumped on my bed at almost dawn, his eyes sparkling with impatience. "Are we going to Grandma and Grandpa's yet?" he asked, his hair sticking out in all directions after sleep. "It's still early," I laughed, hugging him and pulling him closer. "We have plenty of time to get ready." I had been preparing for this day for several weeks. I ordered a set of rare Californian wine for my father, his favorite, although the bottles cost an amount that I knew my parents would consider exorbitant for my income level. I bought carefully selected gifts for everyone, an elegant leather business card holder for my father, a stylish shawl for my mother, a construction set and a board game for Karen's children. After breakfast, I called my mother to confirm our arrival time. Her voice sounded tense, as if she were holding a to-do list for half the day. "We're sitting down at the table at 3, she said. "Your father can't stand tardiness." "Okay, Mom, we'll be there by 1. "Do we need to bring anything?" There was a pause. "Megan is in charge of the side dishes. She makes a delicious sweet potato casserole. You just bring yourself and Ethan on time. And please, make sure he looks decent." Last time, his reindeer sweater was, to put it mildly, inappropriate. That sweater was a Christmas gift to Ethan, and he loved wearing it. I clenched my teeth but held back. "We'll be dressed appropriately, Mom. See you soon." After the call with my mom, I immediately felt time start to rush us. Ethan and I began to hurry to get ready. I helped him put on a light-colored festive shirt and dark trousers. He beamed with pride, looking at himself in the mirror. "You're a real gentleman," I said, buttoning the last buttons. "And you're very beautiful, Mom," he replied, glancing at my deep gray soft wool dress. "Will Aunt Megan and Aunt Karen be there?" he asked with curiosity. "Of course," I nodded. "The whole family will be there. And we'll try to have a peaceful evening." The drive to my parents' house in the suburbs took just under an hour. The same colonial-style mansion appeared before us, a well-kept garden, perfectly trimmed bushes, a driveway sparkling with fresh gravel. By tradition, my father always demanded that the cars be parked in a strict order, and his black Mercedes invariably stood right at the main entrance, as a symbol of his status. They were proud of this house, displaying it as proof of their success. But only I knew the truth. For the last 3 years, it was my transfers, hidden behind a front company, that saved them from losing their property. Without my help, the bank would have long ago taken this facade of a perfect life. We arrived at the house at 10 to 2. Ethan was holding 2 neatly wrapped packages for his grandmother and grandfather, pressing them to his chest as carefully as if they were treasures. I was carrying the box of wine and a bag of gifts, forcing myself to take a deep breath before ringing the doorbell. The door swung open, and Megan appeared on the threshold. Her perfectly styled hair swayed slightly as she looked me up and down, a quick but sharp glance. "Earlier than necessary," she said with a barely noticeable annoyance. Turning to Ethan, she put on a forced smile. "Hi, Ethan. The kids are in the living room, playing. Try not to make a mess before we sit down at the table, okay? No hugs, no joy at seeing us, only cold formality." I felt my son grip the edge of my coat tighter, as if he himself felt the tension. "Go on, buddy," I said softly to him. "Find your cousins, you'll like it." Ethan headed for the playroom, and Megan threw over her shoulder. "Mom's setting the table, Dad and David are watching the game. Karen's there too." Lily and Josh were running around the house, not noticing Ethan. As I walked to the kitchen, I heard my father's voice from his study. "She came too early. Apparently, she has no other plans." "Well, at least she dressed the boy decently," my mother replied. "She's usually terrible at that." I froze in the hallway, feeling my heart clench, and then took a deep breath. I lifted my head, squared my shoulders, and walked on. For Ethan's sake, I had to endure this evening. A smile on my face would be my armor, as always. In the kitchen, my mother, Linda, was transferring cranberry sauce into a bowl. Seeing me, she only said dryly, "Rachel, you've come too early." "Merry Christmas, Mom," I replied, putting down the gifts and kissing her on the cheek. She allowed it but remained tense. "Put this in the dining room," she nodded. "We give gifts after dinner. It's Megan's idea." "Okay. Can I help you?" "No, Megan and I have done everything. You'd better check on Ethan, so he doesn't bother his cousins." I nodded obediently, the familiar feeling of coldness inside growing stronger. But I reminded myself, this is just the beginning of the evening. I have to hold on for my son's sake. In the hallway, I heard muffled voices. Megan was saying to my father, "Her dress isn't bad. But I wonder how she could afford it on her salary." My father snorted. "Probably got into debt again. She never knew how to handle money." I walked past, pretending not to notice anything. My cheeks were burning, from the sarcasm of the situation. The man whose house was being held up by my secret payments was talking about financial discipline. When I entered the playroom, forcing myself to look composed, the first thing I saw was Ethan. He was sitting on the carpet in the corner, flipping through a picture book, while his cousins were engrossed in a video game, as if he didn't exist at all. "Hey, buddy," I said quietly, sitting down next to him. "How are you doing?" He shrugged, his gaze dull. "They said I'm too little for these games." My chest tightened, but I kept my tone light. "You know what? Let them. I have a better idea. Let's go see if they need help in the kitchen. Maybe Grandma will show you how to fold napkins beautifully. You like that sort of thing, right?" He nodded, and we walked hand in hand down the hallway. Exactly at 3, my mother rang a small silver bell, the very one she had received from her grandmother for her wedding. The thin chime echoed through the house and gathered everyone in the dining room. Ethan held my hand tightly as we approached the long table, set with ostentatious luxury. Everything was arranged to immediately show who was more important here. Father took the head of the table, Mother sat opposite him. Megan and Karen sat in the center with their husbands and children, places of honor. And Ethan and I were seated at the very end, next to my mother, but as far as possible from my father, as if our mistakes could infect the others. "Everyone take your seats," my father said with importance. Although the place cards were unnecessary, everyone already knew their place in this family arrangement. Ethan climbed onto his chair, his legs dangling above the floor. No one even remembered the child's booster seat that stood dusty in the corner, left over from Karen's children's time. "Rachel, make sure Ethan doesn't spill anything on the tablecloth," my mother remarked dryly. "It's Belgian lace." "Don't worry, he'll be careful," I replied, placing a napkin on his lap myself. I looked at my son and gave him a warm smile. He smiled back, but uncertainly, as if he already felt the tension in the air. My father stood at the head of the table, a turkey carving knife gleaming in his hands, his unwavering gesture every holiday. His white shirt and stern tie made him look less like the host of the house and more like a man reading a report to an audience. Raising his glass, he began to list the family's achievements: Megan with her successful charity evening, Karen and David with a new contract, the children with their sports and school awards. Each name was spoken with a pause and emphasis, as if they were items on a list. And when his gaze could have fallen on me and Ethan, it simply slid past, as if we weren't at the table at all. And, of course, to Linda, he concluded, without her efforts and care, such evenings would not be possible. A heavy and deliberately emphasized silence hung in the air. Ethan leaned towards me, his eyes wide with sincere confusion. "Mom, why didn't they say anything about us?" he whispered, too loudly for such silence. Someone at the table snorted. David, Karen's husband, remarked with a smirk. Children sometimes ask the most direct questions. His intonation made it clear that he considered Ethan's words not an innocent remark, but something awkward and inappropriate. My father forced a strained smile. "Well, you could say that Rachel has shown persistence, staying at her job for so long. Consistency also means something." The word stung, but I answered calmly, "For Ethan's sake." "Thank you, Dad. We've had a good year." My mother immediately turned to my son. "So what grade are you in now, Ethan?" "I'm in kindergarten, Grandma," he said seriously. "My teacher says I read better than many of the older kids." She replied indifferently. And Karen was saying that her son was already ahead of his peers at that age. The conversation returned to its usual course. I mentioned that Ethan was into drawing, but Karen immediately pulled out her phone to show everyone her children's new masterpieces. As soon as I started talking about a book I liked, my father and David interrupted, discussing their projects and articles. My father, finishing his glass of expensive wine, became more and more sarcastic. "Rachel," he said, pausing, "don't you think your son needs a father in the house? A boy needs to see a male role model." I put down my fork and answered calmly. "Ethan has everything: stability, love, and care. But without a man, it's all incomplete," my father persisted. "How will he grow up with the right values?" I was about to answer when Karen suddenly intervened. She looked at her husband and said with a smile, "Since we're talking about family, David and I have some news." All eyes turned to her. Karen placed a hand on her stomach. "We're having a third child in the summer." The table erupted in enthusiastic exclamations. My mother clapped her hands, my father stood up and raised his glass to the new addition to the family. Ethan secretly glanced at me, clearly noticing the striking contrast, the excitement for Karen and the cold attitude towards us. "That's wonderful news," I said sincerely. "Congratulations, Karen and David." "Thank you," Karen replied, barely holding my gaze, and immediately turned to our mother. "We're going to turn the guest room into a nursery. Will you help us with the design?" "Of course," my mother beamed. What a joy. Another grandchild in our family. And again, Ethan was as if invisible, as if he never counted in her calculations. When dessert was served, Megan drew attention by clearing her throat slightly. "I have important news too," she said, beaming. "I'm being appointed head of the department at Henderson Financial. A pay raise and stock options to boot." Enthusiastic exclamations followed. My father even teared up with pride. I had never seen such a reaction from him to my successes. This calls for a celebration, he said and went to the cabinet for his collection bottle of whiskey. While he was away, Ethan tugged at my sleeve. Mom, can I tell them? I gave him an encouraging nod. I got a blue ribbon for my drawing, he said proudly. It was chosen for the district exhibition. An awkward pause hung in the air. My mother finally managed. That's very nice, Ethan. And immediately turned to Karen. So what about the design for the new nursery? My son's face fell, and I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. For the record, I said louder than usual, only 3 were chosen from hundreds at his school. It's a great honor, not just nice. Karen waved it off with a slight smirk. Well, the criteria are different in public schools. Ethan goes to Westfield Academy, I replied firmly. It's one of the most prestigious private schools in the county. They didn't know that I'm on the board of trustees and even founded a scholarship fund there. My mother frowned. Westfield? And how do you pay for that? On your tech support job? I know how to manage my finances, I said calmly. My father returned with a glass in his hand and smirked. Well, at least Ryan is finally contributing something. I guess he's good for something after all. No, I looked straight at him. Ryan has never paid any child support or assistance. All the tuition and everything else is my responsibility. And I'm proud that I can give that to my son. A heavy pause fell in the dining room. At that moment, Ethan's cousin reached for a plate of cookies, and his hand brushed against a vase standing on the edge of the table. It teetered and, before anyone could catch it, fell to the floor with a loud crash, shattering into shiny pieces. Oh my God, look what happened. Megan exclaimed sharply, turning to my son. Ethan, you need to be more careful. It wasn't me, he whispered, looking at the shards in fear. His elbow hit it. Stop shifting the blame, Karen intervened, her eyes flashing lightning. There's no need to make up excuses. I was about to intervene, but my father spoke first, his voice cold and accusatory. That was your grandmother's crystal. A real heirloom. And that's why, Rachel, there's always trouble in the house with your child. But Dad, I began. I saw it, he cut me off sharply. Ethan jerked his hand, the vase fell. It's always the same, first carelessness, then attempts to shift responsibility onto others. My son's eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, Grandpa. I really didn't mean to, he mumbled, lowering his head. Of course, you didn't mean to, my mother said coldly, picking up the shards with a napkin. But apologies won't glue back together what's already broken. At that moment, something inside me broke. Ethan sat with a guilty look, although he had done nothing wrong. The broken vase seemed to put an end to the illusion I had been trying to maintain for years. My father jumped up, his face flushed with anger and drink. This is what happens in single-parent families. No respect, no discipline. It was an accident, I said calmly. Ethan had nothing to do with it. You dare to argue, he roared. 30 years old, no husband, no career, living off God knows what. You've always been a disgrace to this family, and now you're making your son the same. I held Ethan's hand tightly. He was trembling, and for the first time, I felt that I had to protect him at any cost, not stay silent. Enough, I said in a quiet but firm voice, feeling determination welling up in my chest. My father turned to me sharply, his face contorted with irritation. Enough? No, Rachel, I've had enough. I'm tired of tolerating your gloomy presence at our family dinners. I'm tired of watching you raise a child without a father's hand, without discipline and respect for traditions. You're a disgrace to our family name. My father didn't let me answer and continued with emphasis. Children should have a home where there is a mother and a father. Where there is order, stability, and values. But your boy is growing up in an empty house, deprived of a real foundation. Ethan, sitting next to me, was no longer holding back tears. His eyes filled with despair, and he hid his face in my side. I covered his shoulders with my arm, protecting him from these words, and slowly rose from the table. We're not going to listen to this anymore. We're leaving. My father's lips twisted into a contemptuous smirk. Running away again? You've never been able to face reality. You always run away as soon as things get difficult. I met his gaze, my words calm but forceful. The reality is that you have never accepted me or my son for who we are. And I will no longer allow you to humiliate us. My father's face flushed with anger. He slammed his palm on the table so hard that the glasses and cutlery jumped. Get out. Out of this house, immediately. You and your child are not part of this family. Ethan sobbed under my arm, and I felt his small body tremble. Every word from my father cut to the quick, but inside me there was only one thing: cold determination. A dead silence fell over the table, as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. Even Karen, who rarely lost her composure, looked bewildered by the fury with which my father had snapped. William, my mother said quietly, her voice pleading. It's Christmas today. I don't care, he said. Holiday or not, I won't tolerate this. Rachel, you are a disgrace to the family. I looked around the table. My mother, pale, her lips tightly pressed. Megan, her eyes downcast, but with no intention of intervening. Karen, shock and a hidden smirk. David was staring at his plate. Even the children fell silent, understanding that the perfect family had cracked before their eyes. I took a deep breath, as if preparing for a battle, and straightened up. Fine, I said quietly but confidently. I bent down to Ethan, whose eyes were shining with tears. Put on your coat, son. We're leaving. But, Mom, he sobbed, barely audible, what about Grandma's pie? My heart ached, but I smiled at him. There will be more pies, I assured him gently. But what we've experienced here, we don't need any more. That's right, my father shouted from the dining room. Running away is all you know how to do. I helped Ethan into his coat, took my bag and keys myself. My hands remained steady, though a storm was raging inside me. In the hallway, the whole family lined up as if to see us off, but not out of warmth, but out of curiosity and cold superiority. I turned to them and spoke calmly, but in a way that my words cut through the silence. You know, I've sought your approval for so many years. I wanted Ethan to have a real family, to feel the support that I thought I had in my childhood. But today I realized, it was a beautiful mask. There is no family here. There are only judgments, comparisons, and conditional love. My father took a step forward, opening his mouth, but I raised my hand, and he faltered. Ethan and I deserve better, I said firmly. Love without contempt and humiliation. And thank you for showing that so clearly today. I opened the door and led Ethan out into the cold evening air. Behind me, I could still hear my father's voice, but his shouts no longer hurt me, they had turned into just noise. Why does Grandpa treat us like that, Mom? He asked, wiping his eyes with his sleeve. He's not angry at you, son, I answered gently, starting the ignition. He just doesn't know how to accept us for who we are. But that's not our concern anymore. As we drove away from the very house that I had secretly saved from debts and the bank, I made a decision that would turn our whole life around. I was no longer going to hide my achievements. Enough of letting their contempt define my worth. It was time to build a life on honest connections and real respect. At home, I arranged a small celebration for Ethan and me, dinner, laughter, dessert, and a movie under blankets. When he fell asleep, I made a few important calls, the beginning of a new chapter. The morning greeted us with silence. Ethan was asleep with a toy in his arms, and I was at my laptop with a cup of coffee, checking the details of our future. The phone vibrated, and Diana's name appeared on the screen, my assistant, whom my family had always considered just an acquaintance of mine. "Good morning, Rachel," she said when I answered. "Everything is ready. The house in Miami is being prepared, the office will be equipped by the beginning of the week. The school has confirmed Ethan's transfer, they are very happy to have him in the middle of the year." "Excellent, thank you, Diana," I replied quietly, so as not to wake my son. "And what about the other matter?" "I've already spoken with the financial group. They are waiting for your confirmation to stop all transfers through the front companies." I took a deep breath. For too long I had been their invisible support, paying off my parents' mortgage, helping Megan's business, paying for Karen's children's education, and even covering her expensive whims. All secretly, so that no one knew where the money was coming from. "Stop everything," I said confidently. "Immediately. Are you sure you're ready? It will be a shock for them." "Yes," I replied firmly. "It's time for them to learn to live with the consequences." After the call with Michael, I felt a strange calm. He confirmed all front companies would be closed, and the money would go directly to my personal fund. In a few days, my parents' and sisters' bills would start arriving without the usual, miraculous, deposits. Ethan came out of the room, rubbing his eyes. "Mom, are we home?" "Yes, sweetie. Yesterday we were at Grandma and Grandpa's, and today we have new plans," I replied. He frowned. "Are we going there again?" I hugged him and looked into his eyes. "No, we won't go anymore. But we have a better idea. How would you like to live in a house by the ocean? Remember the one in Miami, with the palm trees and the big pool?" Ethan's eyes lit up. "Really? The very same one?" "Yes. Your new school will be there, and I'll have an office. I can work from anywhere, because I run my own company." He tilted his head in surprise. "Wait, you're the boss? Not just helping fix computers?" I laughed and nodded. "I really am the boss. I have a whole team." Ethan broke into a smile. "So you're like a boss, or like a queen?" "Almost," I winked. "But the main thing is that now everyone will know about it." At the breakfast table, I decided to talk to Ethan in simple terms so he would understand. I told him that we have money and have always been safe, but until now I had hidden it from his grandmother, grandfather, and aunts. Now everything would be different. We would move to Miami and live openly, without secrets and masks. Ethan thoughtfully ran his knife over the bread, spreading strawberry jam, and then looked up. "Mom, will we still see Grandma and Grandpa?" I sighed and patted his shoulder. "That depends on them, son. We're always ready to talk, but only if they learn to treat us with respect and kindness." Our house in Miami was a true masterpiece, a modern building of glass and light-colored stone with huge panoramic windows overlooking the ocean, and a spacious infinity pool in the yard. Ethan ran through the rooms, peeking into his bedroom with a water view, then into the playroom that I had designed especially for him. "Is this really our house?" he asked, hardly believing his eyes. "It is," I confirmed with a smile. "And now we don't have to pretend otherwise anymore." The first week in Miami was a real relief for us. We swam in the ocean, walked around the neighborhood, got acquainted with his new school, and for the first time in many years, felt the weight of judgment and pretense fall from our shoulders. But soon the calls began. Megan was the first to call. There was panic in her voice. "Rachel, something strange is happening. The investors who always supported my project suddenly pulled out. All on the same day. Do you know anything?" "No," I replied calmly. "But I'm sure that a successful businesswoman like you must have backup plans." Next, Karen called. Her voice was tinged with irritation, barely concealed by practiced politeness. "Rachel, have you heard? We were just informed by the school that the children's scholarships were revoked in the middle of the year. Can you imagine? The foundation that funded them suddenly ceased operations. It must be a mistake. That's unfortunate, I replied calmly. I hope you and David find a solution. A couple of days later, a call came from my mother. Her voice trembled with panic. Rachel, everything is terrible. We received an eviction notice. Your father is furious, he's sure it's a bank error. But they insist that the mortgage hasn't been paid for several months. That's difficult, Mom. Have you tried talking to a financial specialist? We don't have the funds for consultants, she snapped. We could lose the house, the very house where you grew up. Don't you care at all? I took a deep breath and said evenly. I care a lot, Mom. Especially about how people treat my son. A heavy, meaningful silence hung on the line. A week after Christmas, the call I had been waiting for came. It was my father. His voice sounded strange, without its usual harshness, full of fatigue and despair. Rachel, he said without any preamble. Everything is falling apart. The bank insists that the mortgage hasn't been paid, although the statements used to show payments. Megan's business is on the rocks. Karen is complaining that the school is demanding payment for the entire semester at once. It feels like someone is deliberately cutting off all our support channels. Sounds serious, I replied calmly, watching Ethan play with his construction set on the terrace of our oceanfront home. Have you ever considered that your usual comfort was not built on the foundation you thought it was? What do you mean? He asked sharply, a hint of his old authority in his voice. Dad, where do you think the money has been coming from all these years? When your investments failed after the crisis. When Megan's projects fell apart one after another. When Karen and David were spending more than he brought in from his firm. How would you know about such things? His voice dropped almost to a whisper. I know everything. Because for all these years, I'm the one who has been covering the gaps. That's impossible, he whispered. You just work somewhere with computers. No, Dad. I am the owner of Stratasoft. The same company that acquired TechFusion for $30 million 3 years ago. I am its CEO and main shareholder. After my words, there was a silence, and I could only hear his breathing. That can't be true, he finally managed, but there was no conviction in his voice. All the payments came from Andrew's Heritage Holdings. I created it myself. The mortgage, Megan's investors, the scholarships for Karen's children, it was all me. Even your vacations and the club. Why hide it? He asked hoarsely. Because I wanted you to accept me and Ethan as family, not as a wallet. But I realized that would never happen. If all this is true, you have to keep paying. We could lose the house. The business is collapsing. Your sister's children. The children will be fine in a regular school, I interrupted. Just like the disgrace of the family and her son managed without your support. I had held back years of bitterness, but now it broke through. You called me a burden and kicked your grandson out on the street on a holiday. Consequences are inevitable. You can't do this, he said, but fear was in his voice. I'm not doing anything to you, Dad. I've just stopped doing things for you. You want an apology? Fine, I'm sorry for my words. I lost my temper over the vase. It's not about the vase, I replied. It's about years of contempt. I have to show Ethan that he deserves respect. And remind myself that I'm not a failure, as you tried to make me believe. I heard him breathing heavily, clearly trying to digest what he had heard. When he spoke again, his voice sounded muffled, almost without its usual confidence. Where are you now? We need to talk about this face to face. Ethan and I have moved to Miami, I replied calmly. We're starting a new life here, where we are not judged. To Miami, there was a panicked note in his voice. You can't just take my grandson so far away without discussing it with us. I couldn't help but laugh quietly. Even to myself, the sound seemed unexpected. You lost the right to such conversations the moment you called him spoiled and threw us out of the house on a holiday, I said, no longer softening my words or tone. The conversation ended rather quickly. My father remained in a state of confusion, unable to comprehend what I had revealed to him. I understood that many difficult conversations lay ahead, but for the first time in my adult life, I felt that I was now the one setting the rules in my relationship with my family. That evening, Ethan and I sat on the terrace, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and pink. He suddenly looked at me seriously, far more mature than his years. "Mom, are Grandma and Grandpa, Aunt Megan and Aunt Karen, going to be okay?" I ran my hand through his hair and answered softly. "They'll have to change a lot, but they'll manage. They'll just have to live on their own means now, not on ours." And was it really a secret? That we were giving them money? Yes, I nodded. "But you know, I think you and I don't need any more secrets." He shook his head seriously. "No more secrets then. Just us and our life." "Exactly," I agreed, holding him close as the sun slowly set behind the horizon. I launched a branch of my company in Miami and finally took on the project I had dreamed of since my student years, an educational technology project. We began developing simple and accessible programming courses for schools in poor neighborhoods to give children a chance for a future. In the evenings, I no longer racked my brain over how we looked in the eyes of my family. Instead, I built real connections. I joined a community of mentors for women entrepreneurs and made friends there who saw me not as a threat or an inconvenient daughter, but as a partner and like-minded person. With them, I could talk about goals, plans, ambitions, and not expect judgment. And only then did I realize for the first time, now I didn't have to hide any part of my work, or any part of myself. For the first time in my adult life, I was whole and free. Over time, the calls from my family became constant, from angry complaints to attempts at reconciliation. My mother made the real step. After a while, she called, and her voice lacked its former coldness. She admitted that she missed Ethan, remembered his drawings and how he helped her with the flowers. This surprised me. I had never heard such words from her before. She offered to come to Miami alone. I agreed, but immediately set conditions: no reproaches towards me, no comparisons with Karen's children, and no hints that Ethan needed a father. Only respect and acceptance. After a pause, my mother agreed. And, to my surprise, she really managed. A week before Thanksgiving, my mother came to Miami, and she looked not at all as formidable as in my memories. She brought Ethan gifts, carefully selected drawing sets, not the usual, useful, toys that she considered more appropriate. She tried to spend time with him in a way that was comfortable for him, and I noticed that. On the second day, as we sat by the pool and watched Ethan splashing in the water, my mother suddenly turned to me with moist eyes. "I was a bad mother to you, wasn't I?" This question caught me off guard. I answered after a pause. "You always wanted me to fit your ideal. But I could never be the daughter you imagined for yourself." My mother nervously twisted her ring and said, "I thought I was doing the best for you by pushing you towards what I thought would bring success. I didn't understand that your vision of happiness was different." "And now?" I asked. She looked around at the house by the ocean, the pool, our new surroundings. "Now I see, you always knew what you were doing. You've built a wonderful life, Rachel. And you did it your way." It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a beginning. By the time she left, we had a new, fragile, but honest relationship, no longer based on expectations, but on reality. Megan was the next to get in touch. Her projects were falling apart, and, swallowing her pride, she called me, not for money, but for advice. "I just can't understand how you did it," she admitted during a video call. "To build such a successful company from scratch." "It's not a miracle," I replied calmly. "Just years of hard work and the ability to listen to what people really need, not to impose on them what seems right." Megan gave a wry smile. That's something I was never good at. Always trying to live up to our parents' expectations. Especially Dad's. And did it help? I asked, without reproach, but directly. She lowered her eyes. No. He's changed. Quieter. Sometimes I notice him sitting and looking at your old photos. I think he misses you. He misses having control over me, I corrected her. That's not the same as missing a person. Megan thought about it, her face softened. Maybe. Or maybe he's finally realizing what he lost when he tried to break you to fit his rules. After that conversation, our relationship changed. I didn't save her business, but I introduced Megan to consultants who helped her restructure it more sensibly. Gradually, she began to see me not as the younger sister who went the wrong way, but as an equal. And, to my surprise, I started to enjoy spending time with her when it was free of the usual judgment and rivalry. Karen held out the longest. When she finally called, her voice was filled with anger. Do you realize what you've done? She blurted out. The kids had to leave school in the middle of the year. That's a blow to them. Just as painful as when my son was thrown out of Christmas dinner, I replied calmly. Karen was indignant. That's completely different. Ethan is little, he probably doesn't even remember it. He remembers, I said firmly. Children always remember when they are made to feel like outsiders. So this is revenge? You're getting revenge using my children? No, this is just a return to reality. You and David have a good income, a beautiful house. Now your children will go to a regular school, like most. Karen ended the conversation abruptly, but time did its work. On social media, her ostentatious luxury became noticeably more modest. She mentioned volunteering at the new school. And after Ethan's birthday, a short message arrived. Want our kids to video call? It was a tiny olive branch of reconciliation. And I agreed, for my son's sake. After all, children are not to blame for the battles adults fight. My father stayed away, avoiding direct conversation with me. I heard all the news through my mother. To cope with their debts, my parents refinanced their mortgage, sold one of their cars, and gave up their club membership and other luxuries. Later, Megan told me that my father had taken a consulting position, taking on a real job for the first time in a long time. As Thanksgiving approached, Ethan and I were preparing for our first holiday in our new home. Instead of a Christmas tree, we decorated the table and terrace with autumn garlands and candles, baked pumpkin pies with our neighbors, the Ramirezes, and discussed which traditions we wanted to leave in the past and which to invent anew. Will we see Grandma and Grandpa for Thanksgiving? Ethan asked in the evening as we hung paper garlands in the living room. Not this time, honey, I replied. But Grandma might come in January. And Grandpa, he persisted. I thought for a moment, choosing my words. Grandpa needs time to learn to be kinder to people. When he's ready, he can come too. Ethan nodded seriously. People can change if they want to, right? Yes, I confirmed, hugging him. Everyone can change if they make an effort. We set the holiday table for friends and neighbors. The house was filled with laughter, warmth, and a sense of true unity. When I saw Ethan joyfully sharing his ideas and drawings with the guests, I understood. Here we had finally created what was always lacking in my parents' house, an atmosphere where people are valued not for their showy perfection, but for who they really are. Late in the evening, when Ethan was already asleep, I sat on our terrace overlooking the moonlit ocean and thought about how quickly our lives had changed in 1 month. The decisive moment had happened on Thanksgiving, the day that broke the old chains of pretense and became the beginning of our new freedom. The phone vibrated. A message. From my father. The first direct communication from him since that night. Happy Thanksgiving to you and Ethan. Your mother shows me the pictures you send. The house looks decent. I hope you're both doing well. It was neither an apology nor a reconciliation. But it was an acknowledgement, without judgment or reproach. And that, strangely enough, was enough. I replied with a short, happy Thanksgiving, and looked at the calm waves again. A sense of peace settled within me. We had created our own home, a place where Ethan would grow up knowing that his worth did not depend on others' expectations. Where he would learn that respect is something earned through actions, not demanded by force. Where family is defined by love and support, not by obligations and criticism. This was the greatest gift I could give him, and myself. A year passed. A Christmassy warmth filled Miami. Ethan confidently finished his first year at Wellington Prep, made friends, and even showed his work at the school fair. At first, he had nightmares, but with the help of a psychologist, they were replaced by dreams of the sea. My own recovery was slower, doubts sometimes returned, but gradually they subsided. I was learning to live honestly and without masks. My company grew, and I launched a foundation to help single parents in IT. There was something more to this than just business. It was a way to turn my pain into support for others. My relationship with my family took a form I could not have imagined before. My mother started visiting almost every month, and with each visit, she seemed a little softer, warmer, more real. The last time, she even allowed herself to walk barefoot on the sand with Ethan, a gesture that the former Linda Hudson, always impeccable and confined within the bounds of proper behavior, would have considered unacceptable. At sunset, sitting next to me on the terrace, she said quietly, "I lived for so many years to please others, and never asked myself what I wanted." Megan restructured her business into a more modest but stable format. We unexpectedly found common ground. She started getting involved in my foundation's initiatives, contributing her practical perspective, and for the first time in our lives, we worked as allies, not rivals. Karen remained distant the longest, but gradually her tone changed. She admitted that the children had settled in well at their new school. One became interested in science, the other made friends in a more diverse group. In one conversation, she remarked, "I think you could have at least warned us. But I guess we wouldn't have listened anyway." But my father remained the most adamant. His pride long prevented any attempts at reconciliation. Everything changed after a heart attack in the spring, mild, but telling. I quickly came to the hospital and sat with my mother while he was being examined. When I was finally allowed into his room, I saw him differently, not formidable and unshakable, but weakened and confused. "You came," he said in surprise. "Of course. You're still my father." He fell silent, listening to the monotonous beeps of the equipment. Then, as if gathering courage, he said, "I've rethought a lot. All these houses, clubs, showy reputation. When you think you might not wake up, it all loses its meaning. And what remains important?" I asked quietly. He met my gaze. "Family. But not in the way I understood it. Not the appearance, not the achievements, but those who are there for you in the toughest moments." It wasn't a full apology. But for William Hudson, these words were a step towards something he had never been able to do before, to recognize the true value of his loved ones. In the weeks following his attack, my father gradually softened. Conversations became calmer, without the former harshness. In July, he and my mother decided to visit us in Miami. I prepared Ethan, explaining that his grandfather was trying to change, and we decided to give him that chance. "People can change if they want to," Ethan said seriously, as if reminding me of the words I once told him on Thanksgiving. "I think you're right," I smiled. "And our job is to appreciate his efforts, but at the same time, remember our boundaries." For me, this became the most important discovery. Forgiveness does not mean giving up self-respect. Real boundaries are not a punishment for others, but a protection for oneself. And only in this balance can love and respect coexist. I named my foundation The New Chapter. Its goal was to help single parents with resources, mentorship, and a sense of community. Through this work, I met dozens of women and men who shared similar stories of family judgment and rejection. For years, many believed that their non-standard families were worse than others, that they had lost just because they didn't fit into the usual expectations. "You showed me that I don't have to live by that script," one young mother told me at a foundation meeting. "That success can be defined by your own rules." Listening to them, I seemed to hear echoes of my own story and understood. Our need for acceptance is universal, as is the right to create a family in a way that nourishes us, not breaks us. Ethan and I formed our own definition of family. It included our grandparents, sisters, and their families, albeit to varying degrees, but also neighbors, colleagues, Ethan's friends, and people from our new community. It was a family based not on formal obligations or blood ties, but on respect, support, and genuine care. Several years have passed since that Christmas when Ethan and I were thrown out. At the time, it seemed like the end. In fact, it turned out to be the beginning. The beginning of a new life, in which we no longer sought the approval of those who were accustomed only to judging. We built a home full of warmth and laughter. We created a family where people are valued not for their achievements or appearance, but for their very essence. Ethan is growing up to be a confident, kind boy who knows he is loved unconditionally. My parents, my sisters, each changed in their own way. Some slowly, some painfully, but they all faced the truth that the old rules no longer work. And I no longer hide myself or my success. I understood the most important thing: strength is not in pleasing others' expectations, but in defining for yourself what family and success mean. And as Ethan and I sat on the shore of the ocean in Miami, watching the sun sink into the water, I felt that rare inner silence that comes when you finally find yourself where you are supposed to be. This was our end to the old story. And the beginning of a new one.